Hi, I'm Herb Stevenson.
Denny Pavan here.
Welcome to Natural Passages, Revealing the Unmarked Doors of Life. Denny and I are going to have an open conversation on a variety of subjects. I'll try and relate them back to presence, and we hope it's useful for you. And thanks for joining us.
Very good. Herb, it's nice to meet you, and I got a chance to spend a few minutes here speaking to you today. The doors of life, if you could just bring me up to a little bit of an explanation of opening these doors, closing these doors. How does it work?
That's a really good question. Most of us are taught what's good, bad, right, wrong, and the right way to do things, including how to be successful. So when I was younger, many years ago, first started 50 years ago into my career, Dress for Success was a hot #1 bestseller.
Remember that? Yeah.
Speaking with presence, and which was actually diction, and all of those are formulaic ways to be successful, but it doesn't really talk about how to be who you are.
That's an interesting thought, because beyond the surface, who you are is under the surface, right? It's your spiritual soul.
Sure. And the problem is, a question that I ask many people over time, and I'll ask you, how old do you have to be to give yourself permission to be who you are?
Well, I think that, and I'm going to maybe speak from a personal standpoint.
Please.
I think through life, there are moments of self-discovery that you may or may not know that you have.
Mm-hmm.
And not to go into long stories, but there are certain points in time, when you're a child, there are certain elements of self-discovery on, hey, I can draw.
Sure.
You get older, maybe you're an athlete. Wow, I can throw the ball 50 yards. In business, you have a certain thing that you've discovered on how you can conduct yourself in a business world. But then
Sure.
Some of those things are still surface, but what do you discover about yourself internally?
Well, everything that you're talking about is how we do life. And I come in from a point of view of presence, which is how do I be in life? And so the examples we were chatting about, do you take the time to stop and look at the sky? Or you just run out and jump in a car and spill your coffee, take off and run to the next meeting, all the way going there, only paying enough attention to get there and missing everything that's around you. Those are the unmarked doors of life, and we just keep walking by them. So the whole idea of the podcast, Revealing the Unmarked Doors of Life, is pointing out you can slow down to go fast.
I understand we do, on a daily basis, forget about our surroundings sometimes. I'm, like you say, I'm in a car ready to get from point A to point B. But then there are certain points, and I think people do experience it though, where, wow, this is really a beautiful day. But do you really think about what composes that beautiful day? From the sky, from the trees, from the, matter of fact, I looked out my window this morning, and maybe you could tell me a little bit about it, but there's a cardinal that seems to be coming around the same time of day. This little red cardinal just sits out there for a while and observes the backyard, and so do I. But that's fascinating. You get a chance to just say, there's got to be a meaning in why this bird keeps coming back. I don't know if it's something that connects with me or just it's connecting because there are worms right out there.
Well, two things about it. From a point of view of presence, the fact that you took the time to even notice the beauty of the cardinal creates a moment. There's a lot of people who would just see it and just keep going, eating their toast and their bacon and eggs or whatever else. So part of it is about quality of life. Now, from a Native American point of view, or many spiritual traditions, cardinal red basically means the vibrancy of life.
That's fascinating.
Might be reminding you.
I'm still kicking.
You're on the right side of the dirt, as they say.
That's it. And the Native American way of life is something that I very, very much appreciate. Recently, my wife and I, we were in Alaska and got a chance to visit. Of course, it's a little bit of a touristy thing, but an Athabascan village, and how the world has progressed. It's done so much in modernization and so forth, but yet going back, they have survived for 10,000 years, maybe.
Probably longer.
Longer than that.
Probably.
But they've accustomed themselves to a certain type of lifestyle, which in those frigid temperatures and so forth, they've adapted, but also they've built their own life around that. It has nothing to do with all of these other sciences and everything else. It's on their beliefs and how you use nature to really exist through feeding and have an understanding between their dogs and salmon and caribou.
Sure. Mm-hmm. So their culture, which culture by my definition is the unwritten rules of survival. It's what we've learned over time in practice that works until something new comes along. And so going up to a village like that and seeing that, their culture is they protect everything they've learned for those 10,000 years. And it's constantly passed down through stories, songs, and practice. So even the children at a very early age are taught how to hunt and do all the various things. That's how we perpetuate culture. Part of the problem we're having in our country right now is we have not perpetuated a unified culture. We've decided to spread it, so to speak. And so we have all these interests vying for something else. My culture. How do I fit in? Why aren't you allowing this? And it's interesting because we're going through this divisiveness, and we're going to have to decide: do we want to have a country of democracy or not? And what does that mean? Is that of the people, by the people, and for the people, meaning all the people, or is it for some of the people? So culture, regardless of a Native American or any country, because I've traveled all over the world, it's what their way of seeing the world is.
This is true. And, when you mentioned democracy, and again, I was mentioning earlier when we were talking about looking at history, the democracy and republicanism, not that we're getting into the politics of what's going on today, but those two areas of thought started thousands of years ago, from
Correct.
Socrates and Plato and even up to Quincy Adams and our history. But there has been that divisiveness between the two. And today, especially, it seems like it's turned from just accommodating people, okay, they are on that side of the fence and this culture's on this side of the fence. It's turned into more vehement hatred. And how do you get past that in the world of, getting a chance to live together with people without having this, how do you say it, angst against others? How do you do that? Do you forgive and forget? I mean, how do we approach this?
Well, there's no such thing as forgive and forget. There is forgiveness, but rarely is there forget. The divisiveness is basically showing that because we don't have a unifying theme or purpose in our country, and there has been, the press has contributed as well as the political groups, is a separation which divides the country instead of unifies. So they will all say, well, I'm going to unify you. But it's not. That a lot of the language is very negative. It tweaks people's personal resentments, things where they feel like they have been misjudged, mistreated. So if you go women's rights, racial justice, etc., all of those have an angst and part of our history. We've not done anything to actually, from a point of view of slowing down and say, what is it that we really need? How do we get fully present to ourselves? How do we create the country we want? even go back to saying is how do we adapt the Constitution, because it truly was for all the people, but right now there's a movement for some of the people, and so till we decide to do that, we're going to have this divisiveness.
Well, hasn't always been there the growth of a society where people that had nothing over time have everything, in a sense, through revolution. When you look at, I'm not saying that the French Revolution was all means of gains of everything, but it was a time where going through the thought worldwide of conquer and take and create cultures in different areas, France, Germany, well, especially England, France, Spain, coming to our land here, your land. And that was the whole thought back then. I'm trying to put together, where does that then start to grow into these different cultures as time goes on through life?
Well, every tribe originally, if you break it down that far, had its own culture and its beliefs of how to survive. Then, as we evolved, ambition started filling some individuals, and that's why the Christians eventually developed the 7 deadly sins, which was saying any excess is too much. We also have a basis in our country that says that we're the rugged individualists, which is now interpreted as I can say or do whatever the hell I want. And regardless of who it offends or how it's contrary to the Constitution or how it's contrary to morality. And that's why we're at our extremes right now. Eventually what will happen, I believe, we'll wake up. We'll realize this is crazy and madness. The people who perpetuate a lot of the craziness are aging. They're not going to be around. All sorts of things could happen. I remember McCarthy, and he was doing the communist thing, and he had the country completely divided until one day they realized that there were none of the people that he said existed. And it was a ruse, and he lost favor and lost election, and the whole thing went away. I'm not so sure in some respects that's not going to happen now, because if you don't antagonize, you tend not to create divisiveness.
That's a very good point when you mention McCarthyism. What helped perpetuate that, too, was the newly discovered world of the media and television.
Right.
And when he was on television, suddenly that spread throughout the country and created this antagonism between he's
right.
a commie,
sure.
and people being pointed out and really
Life's
ruining
around.
their lives.
Right.
And then it made me think of something that I read not too long ago, where the how do you say it, Gutenberg and the press that he invented in was that 1500s, 1400s?
Sure.
That was sort of the media of the time that didn't exist. And when they published a book about witches, if you will, that spread throughout Europe, and the rulers of the day was part of the church and part of the nobility, and kings versus church. Suddenly they're after these people that maybe lived a certain pagan-style life, but it was their nature life that they were living. They were pointed out, and it went from one country to the next to the next. That book that was written, I forget who wrote it, about that really kind of created this whole, division again, where people burned at stake. But
well, if you go back to the Salem witch trials, when they find out there were no witches, it was the deacons of the church wanted land, and so they could get the land by basically saying they're a witch, and then the land would go to the church and the deacons would take over.
Yeah.
So it still comes down to greed, excesses.
Yes.
And humans aren't necessarily always altruistic.
Well, and I would say even there seems to be when we hear through the media one way and an approach of whether it's a war, a battle, a political situation, there's always some underlying purpose behind that, where it may have to do with the gathering of wealth or building certain elements of wealth through certain individuals. Power.
Well, wealth and power are always an issue, and we've not come as a human being as how much is enough. And those who have the most will say there's never enough. And so, again, it's human inconsistencies. That
kind of just, and I apologize, but I'm just thinking about things as you mentioned them when, how much is enough? I mean, excess wealth, what does it mean, really, when you have so much that really, some people do give it back and they do different things with it. And then there are others that I'm going back in history again, like the monks who decided, I'm really going to live more of a life of concentrating on perhaps my belief in the spirit or God and giving up material wealth and still enjoying life, enjoying the ability to be.
Well, human is interesting. I have a friend just came back, two friends actually just came back from India, and I have several others who've done the same thing. And they were bewildered over the fact that the majority of the country lives in squalor, and yet they're the happiest people. They're deeply spiritual. They get up with a smile on their face every day. So, what's better? And so the point of it is wealth leads to needing more. It's addictive. I can't get enough. And I don't have anything against people having material issues, but if it's done for the specific exclusion of other people or harm, well, that's a different story. So when you make a reference to that is there's a whole lot of examples, not even have to be a monk, of just people who are happy by the sake that they're alive. So, well, I'm Herb Stevenson.
Denny Pavan.
And we thank you for listening to this podcast and hope to see you at the next one. Thank you much.